A railway can drown in debt while its trains still move. Russia's rail system is flashing that warning now. Freight has reportedly fallen to a 16-year low. The state rail monopoly is carrying about 4 trillion rubles, roughly $45 billion in debt. On paper, it looks like infrastructure trouble. In reality, it looks like a debt trap on steel. Income shrinks, interest costs rise, assets go up for sale, workers lose jobs, and unpaid wages become survival crises. Coal, steel, grain, timber, tanks, fuel, ammunition all depend on the same tracks. If the tracks keep working, the machine survives. If they choke, factories, exporters, soldiers, and households feel it fast. The warning signs are no longer hidden in spreadsheets. Freight rail is not just transportation. It is cash flow on steel. When economists look at a railway network, they are not only counting trains. They are checking whether mines are shipping, factories are producing, builders are buying, exporters are moving goods, and governments are keeping promises. Reports released in January 2026 said Russia's state railway monopoly suffered its sharpest freight decline in 16 years during 2025. Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation called it another pressure signal across major economic sectors. The same reporting said freight volume had declined for 4 straight years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022. That matters because debt becomes dangerous when the income stream weakens. Cash flow is oxygen. The drop was not limited to one weak category. Grain shipments fell by more than 12%. Construction materials dropped by more than 10%. Timber declined by almost 6%. Industrial raw materials fell 16%, while ferrous metals dropped 17.7%, pointing straight at heavy industry under stress. This is where the railway stops being a transport story. It becomes an X-ray of the economy beneath it. Russia's railways carry the physical economy across one of the largest territories on Earth. Coal, metals, timber, grain, fuel, machinery, and construction materials cannot simply move to trucks at the same scale. Rail links mines with factories, factories with ports, and industrial regions with buyers thousands of kilometers away. It also links military depots with the roads that run toward the battlefield. That is why falling freight is not a boring statistic. It means the most profitable part of the railway business is weakening, while the system still has to be maintained. Rails still need repair. Locomotives still need parts. Workers still need wages. The machine does not get cheaper just because it carries less. Then comes the debt. By January 2026, reports placed Russian Railways' total debt near 4 trillion rubles, or about $45 billion. For a huge infrastructure company, borrowing is normal. The trap begins when revenue quality falls while interest bills rise. Freight transport has traditionally been the company's core earner. If fewer tons move, tariff increases can hide stress for a while, but they cannot create missing cargo. That is the trap. Authorities reportedly tried to fill part of the gap with military movement. Defense-linked cargo kept moving, and reports said about 19,000 containers had been sent by rail from North Korea to Russia. But military freight did not appear large enough to replace the shrinking civilian business. When a company depends on volume, losing volume is like taking a pay cut while the loan payment stays due. The personal finance lesson is brutal. A borrower can look stable until income falls, interest rises, and emergency choices begin. For Russian railways, those choices soon moved from accounting tables to workers, assets, and daily operations. And once the pressure reached people, it stopped looking abstract. In March 2026, Pромsvyazbank reported that around 200 shift workers employed by Novatech Holding Company were stuck at the construction site of the Volkovsky mining and processing plant near Nizhny Tagil. Their wages had reportedly stopped arriving in September 2025. After 6 months, they still had not received the money they said they had earned. The workers claimed the company also stopped paying for food and refused to buy tickets home. Many had traveled hundreds or thousands of kilometers for rotational work. Without pay, they said they struggled with mortgages, bank loans, utility bills, penalties, and late fees. Bills keep moving. That is how unpaid wages become private debt crises. The company delays payment, but the bank does not delay interest. The workers recorded an appeal to Alexander Bastrykhin, chairman of Russia's investigative committee. Their message described having no money, no food, and no way to leave. After that public appeal, authorities opened a criminal case over alleged wage non-payment. Prosecutors requested employment contracts, payroll records, and outstanding payment documents. At the railway company itself, pressure turned into cuts. On March 18, 2026, the Moscow Times reported that Russian railways planned to remove about 15% of its central administrative workforce, around 6,000 jobs. CEO Oleg Belozerov said the cuts would include senior managers across branches, not only lower-level staff. Reports also said the company posted its first annual loss since 2020, while freight fell to its lowest level since 2009. That is not trimming fat. That is survival math. The financial statements showed how thin the margin had become. On March 27, 2026, newly released IFRS figures showed net profit for 2025 collapsing from 50.7 billion rubles to only 2.2 billion rubles. That was a 22-fold fall in 1 year. Revenue, strangely, rose 10.4% to about 3.6 trillion rubles. But higher revenue did not protect profit, because costs were rising faster than money coming in. More money came through the door, less of it survived. Freight volume reportedly fell to 1.1 billion tons in 2025, the weakest level in 16 years. At the same time, Russian railways added about 800 billion rubles of new debt, bringing obligations to roughly 3.18 trillion rubles in those statements. Debt repayment costs reached 534.1 billion rubles. That is the classic interest cost squeeze. The business still operates, but lenders eat more of the cash. And the company cut investment. Its 2025 investment program, covering construction, modernization, locomotives, and rail cars, was reportedly reduced by around 40%, from 1.5 trillion rubles to about 890 billion rubles. That saves cash today, but it can create breakdowns tomorrow. Russian railways also sought 200 billion rubles from the National Welfare Fund, but reports said the government rejected the request. Instead, officials pushed refinancing, debt restructuring, cost cuts, and asset sales. The sell list reportedly included railway facilities, maintenance depots, commercial real estate, and a 49% stake in the Federal Freight Company. That is financial distress. Then came the operational strain. Citing OSINT researcher Chris Owicki, reported that about 300,000 freight wagons, roughly 20% of Russia's wagon fleet, were idle. Some were occupying sidings, depots, and yards instead of moving cargo. Staffing gaps also mattered. Shortages of locomotive drivers and crews reportedly forced around 200 train cancellations every day. Cargo transport had fallen for 20 straight months. Declines hit timber exports, ferrous metals, coal, fertilizers, and construction materials. But they cannot efficiently replace rail across thousands of kilometers with heavy industrial cargo. Once capacity is tied up, delayed, or short-staffed, the problem becomes physical, not just financial. And physical problems compound. The locomotive warning had appeared earlier. In February 2024, reports described locomotive shortages caused partly by missing imported parts. The issue grew during the final months of 2023 as repairs slowed. The problem was not only how many engines existed, it was how many were ready for service. Sanctions after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine reportedly made specialized bearings, proprietary electronics, lubricants, and other foreign components harder to obtain. The Sverdlovsk Railway was described as especially affected, with many locomotives waiting for repairs. Vedomosti sources even claimed some engines returned before maintenance was fully complete, raising the risk of repeat failures. Industry analyst Mikhail Burmistrov of Infoline Analytics said service providers usually aim for about 95% technical readiness. His assessment said readiness had fallen to 93% by mid-2023 and declined further by January 2024. Across a fleet of roughly 20,000 locomotives, a few percentage points means hundreds of engines missing from daily work. In rail, small percentages are not small. Labor pressure deepened the shortage. Mobilization and wartime competition reportedly made experienced maintenance staff harder to keep. Domestic equipment production increased, but analysts noted early technical faults, the kind engineers sometimes call childhood diseases. A network can own rails, wagons, and engines, yet still lose capacity if people and parts disappear. That is when the system starts failing quietly, not all at once, not in one dramatic collapse, but through late repairs, missing crews, idle wagons, delayed freight, rising costs, and debts that do not wait. And over all of it sits the final burden, war demand. According to official estimates from the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as of June 29, 2026, Russia had suffered about 1,402,200 military personnel killed or wounded since the full-scale invasion began. Those Ukrainian estimates also listed losses of 12,066 tanks, 24,845 armored fighting vehicles, 44,969 artillery systems, 1,901 multiple launch rocket systems, 1,454 air defense systems, 436 aircraft, 353 helicopters, and more than 113,000 military vehicles and fuel tankers. These figures are not independently verified, and Russia publishes different numbers. But the logistics reality is clear. Every replacement vehicle, repaired artillery piece, fuel shipment, ammunition load, and troop rotation creates demand on transport. Rail carries the long-distance burden before roads handle the final stretch. That is why this story is bigger than trains. It is about what happens when a system borrows heavily, earns less, cuts investment, sells assets, delays wages, and still has to perform under pressure. Debt always asks one question: what breaks first? Sometimes it is profit. Sometimes it is maintenance. Sometimes it is the worker who cannot get home. Sometimes it is the locomotive waiting for parts that no longer arrive. And sometimes it is confidence itself, the belief that because the trains are still moving, the system is still strong. The trains may still move, the balance sheet may still pretend, but when a railway becomes a debt trap, every destination starts to look like a breaking point.